They buried my name before they buried me. He was raised to believe I died before he was born, until we locked eyes at his college orientation. The silence I ran from is unraveling. The family I lost is chasing ghosts. And now the truth, long hidden, long silenced, is clawing its way to the surface. Because I wasn't dead, I was erased. I learned how to become invisible long before I needed to disappear. Now I live as someone else, in a house that isn't mine with a name I chose from a list at the DMV. The town, Ashwood, Oregon, is small enough to disappear into, yet just large enough that no one asks why an old woman like me lives alone with no family photos on the walls. I tell them I'm a widow. They don't ask who. Grief shuts people up. My days are quiet. Mornings start with the hum of the kettle, the clink of ceramic, the weight of silence pressing against the walls. I walk to the farmer's market on Saturdays. I volunteer at the library shelving other people's stories. I sleep with the light on and keep aspirin on my nightstand. Not for headaches, but for the tightness that sometimes grips my chest when the past knocks louder than usual. My name is Delilah Crowley, at least it used to be. The truth is folded neatly into a shoebox in the back of my closet. Old photographs, a wedding band I haven't worn since Reagan was president, and one letter I wrote but never mailed. I keep them there to remind myself it all happened. That I existed before Ashwood. There's a scar on my collarbone, long and pale like a tree root. I tell people I slipped on ice. That's partly true. I just don't mention the shouting beforehand or the hand that pushed. Most nights I dream in silence. No words, just the echo of a child's laughter I haven't heard in decades. Her name was Brielle. She used to call me Mama. That stopped around the same time I stopped believing I could keep her safe. I had come to terms with the idea that I would die without hearing from her again. It was the cost of breathing. And then the brochure arrived. It came in a bundle of mail, addressed to a Crowley, likely a clerical error. Bright and shiny, it boasted a welcome to the University of Western Oregon, orientation dates, and a photo of laughing freshmen beneath cherry blossom trees. I flipped through it out of habit more than interest, until I saw the name on the student spotlight page. Weston Hale, incoming freshman. Major, journalism, Weston, my grandson. My hands trembled before my heart did. I read the profile twice, same last name. His eyes, there in the small photo, wide, thoughtful, just like his mother's once were. I traced his jawline with my fingertip, something inside me catching like a splinter. How would they have explained me? Or would they have explained me at all? The thought made my stomach turn. I ran my thumb along the edge of the page until it tore. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, rereading that brochure until the sky turned gray. At dawn, I went out and bought a new blouse. Something neutral, something forgettable. By orientation day, I'd rationalized my decision 100 ways. I told myself I'd stand at a distance. Just look, that would be enough. The campus was warmer than expected, the air thick with the hope of beginnings. Students clutched bags and schedules. Parents hovered like shadows. I stayed on the perimeter, heart pounding like I'd committed a crime. Maybe I had. Then I saw him. He stood near a registration tent flanked by friends, taller than in the photo. He laughed at something, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. It was Brielle's laugh, the cadence, the shape of it. I stepped back behind a tree, fingers gripping the bark. I told myself I would leave, that I had no right to be there, but the space between my shoes and the pavement wouldn't listen. He turned. We locked eyes. For a heartbeat, the world stopped spinning. I didn't mean to be so close. I didn't mean to be seen. His face crumpled, then froze, like he'd been sucker punched. His mouth parted, but no words came out. Recognition wasn't just in his eyes. It was in the way he stepped back, the way his chest rose sharply. A boy raised to believe I was dead had just seen me standing 20 feet away, very much alive. I turned and walked, not quickly, not panicked, but each step felt like stepping off a ledge. Behind me, I didn't hear him call out. Maybe he didn't, maybe he couldn't. When I got back to my car, I sat behind the wheel and gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. In the rearview mirror, I saw the truth etched into my face. Not dead, just hidden, and now discovered. They told him I was dead. The words came out of my mouth like something bitter, something spoiled from years of storage. I hadn't meant to speak them aloud, but there they were, hanging in the air like smoke. I hadn't seen Weston since that moment on the campus lawn. I didn't know if he'd followed me, if he even believed his own eyes. But the weight of his expression, his frozen face, that stunned disbelief, burned a hole in my chest all the same. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, the room dim except for the light spilling from the hallway. I stared at the floor and let myself go back, to the last time I saw Brielle. It was raining. Cold, needling rain that clung to your skin. We were in the front hall of our old house, the one with the cracked tiles and the walls too thin to hide an argument. Brielle was 20, already hard around the edges. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "You think leaving is going to fix anything?" Her voice had the steel of her father's. Flat, controlled, almost rehearsed. "I'm not leaving you," I had said, my hands trembling at my sides. "I'm leaving him. I can't—" "You think I don't know what he is?" she interrupted. "You think I haven't learned how to survive him? You're just weak. You always were." That word landed like a slap. Weak. That's what Russell used to call me in his coldest tones. That's what he'd planted in her, watered it daily with his contempt until she bloomed into something sharp and unreachable. "He made you hate me," I said, and I let him. I reached for her then, but she stepped back. No tears, no softness, just that same brittle gaze. "Don't bother writing." I walked out of that house with nothing but a duffel bag and my ID. I thought leaving would be an act of survival. It was, but it was also a surrender. I left her behind because I thought it was the only way either of us had a chance. I told myself she'd understand someday. That lie kept me warm through too many winters. But I didn't know what Russell told her after I left. Did he say I died? Or did she kill me in her mind to make the betrayal easier? I buried the memories in jobs and apartments, moved towns, moved names, and eventually I started writing. Letters, dozens of them. Some I mailed to addresses I knew. Most came back. Returned to sender. Others vanished into silence. Now I know why. 2 days after orientation, Weston found me again. It was in a parking lot behind the college bookstore. I had returned to the area on impulse, half hoping, half dreading I might run into him. He stood a few feet away, tentative. "You look like the woman in our old photo albums," he said quietly. I turned slowly. We stared at each other. Up close, the resemblance to Brielle was even sharper, but there was softness in him, a crack in the armor, like he hadn't yet decided who to become. "I'm sorry," I said. "I never wanted—" "My mom said you died before I was born," he said, "that you had an accident. I used to ask about you when I was a kid. She'd just changed the subject." My breath caught. He looked down, then back up. "But I found this." He handed me a faded envelope, my handwriting, my return address from 20 years ago, never opened. "She kept them," he said. "I found a whole box in the attic last year. She must have read them. Or maybe she couldn't bear to." I opened it with trembling hands. The words inside were shaky, desperate. I'd written about wanting to see Brielle again, about the guilt that never left, about hoping Weston had her eyes. I looked at him. I wrote more. "Can I read them?" I nodded. We sat on the curb and he listened while I told the truth. The quiet horror of living with Russell, the ways he turned love into control. The years I wore his silence like a second skin. How I didn't recognize myself until I looked in the mirror one day and saw a stranger. "He made me small," I said, "until I couldn't see myself at all." Weston didn't say much, but when I paused, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a notepad. "I'm a journalism major," he said, "and I think this is a story worth telling. Ashwood was never meant to be a home, just a hiding place, a rest stop for someone like me, looking over her shoulder more often than forward. But time has a way of sneaking roots into the cracks. Before I knew it, I'd been here 12 years. The silence used to suffocate me. In those first months, I couldn't stand the sound of my own breath. I'd sleep on the couch with the TV, murmuring some late-night infomercial, the hum of artificial voices fending off memories I wasn't ready to sit with. I took a job shelving books at the public library under the name Marie Danner. Marie because it was plain and forgettable. Danner because it belonged to a woman I once met in a shelter. A woman with eyes like shattered windows and hands that trembled when she held her daughter's photo. I'd promised to remember her. The job was quiet, thank God. I worked in the back, mostly in the archives or lost returns. I liked it that way. The books didn't ask where I came from. They didn't look at me with Brielle's eyes. In time, I created a life. Not a full one, but something stitched together from scraps. My house was small, the paint always a little chipped. But it was mine. My garden grew wild on purpose, and my neighbor, Joanne, introduced herself with a cherry pie and a too-knowing smile. Joanne had a way of looking at you like she already knew the worst thing you'd ever done and didn't hold it against you. She was in her 50s, a widow herself, with a laugh that cracked like gravel. She smoked on her porch, swore during church bake sales, and always called me out when I dodged a question. "Marie," she said once, peering over her glasses, "you've got the eyes of someone who survived a war, and not the kind fought overseas." I didn't answer. She didn't press, but slowly she became my tether. A voice in the dark when old ghosts knocked too loudly. The first time I told someone I used to be Delilah Crowley, it was her porch light I sat under. I used to be someone else, I confessed one rainy evening, hands wrapped around a chipped mug. Before I had to stop being her. She nodded once. I figured. In the privacy of my backyard, I buried my wedding ring. The earth was soft, and my fingers trembled as I pressed it into the dirt. A symbol of survival, not surrender. A gravestone for the life I fled. Under my bed, an old shoebox waited. Inside, photos, unsent letters, and the hospital bracelet from when Brielle was born. I hadn't opened it in years. Couldn't. But knowing it was there meant a piece of me still remembered, still hurt. Then Weston returned. He didn't come to my front door, smart boy. He called from a payphone first, left a message that simply said, "I'd like to talk." The first time we met again, I brought 2 folding chairs to the park. We sat under the dying light of the afternoon, awkward, unsure. He looked at me like I was a riddle he wanted to solve, not a story he wanted to rewrite. He didn't ask much. Mostly he listened. Let me speak in fragments. Let the silence between us fill with more than regret. Week by week, he came back. Sometimes to the park. Sometimes he'd knock on Joanne's back door, and I'd let him in through the kitchen. We never used the front. Too visible. I started baking again. Little things, muffins mostly. It gave my hands something to do. He liked blueberry. He told me about his childhood in pieces, too. About Brielle, who had grown harder with each year. Who never smiled much, even when she wasn't angry. Who kept old photos in a tin box and told Weston stories that didn't quite add up. She always talked about family like it was a minefield, he said once, staring into his coffee. But when I found your letters, her handwriting on the envelopes, unopened, I just knew something wasn't right. I wanted to hate Brielle for it, but I couldn't. I knew what it was like to be poisoned slowly, to mistake pain for protection. She was raised in fire, I said, and she thought the burn was love. I watched Weston nod, his jaw tight. He wasn't just looking for his grandmother. He was trying to find his mother in the wreckage, too. One night, as he walked back to his car, he turned and said, "I think you're the first honest person in our family." I wanted to tell him I wasn't. That honesty had come late and clumsy. But instead, I just said, "Then let's make that count for something." I wasn't sure if I was allowed to be a grandmother, if those years could ever be repaired. But as he drove off into the dusk, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of something new, something built from ashes. I knew the confrontation had come. I could feel it in Weston's voice the last time he visited, tight at the edges, too polite, too measured. Something was circling inside him, and he was trying to decide if he wanted to let it out. He didn't say much when he left that day, just hugged me a little longer than usual. But I could tell. He was going to ask her. He later told me it happened on a Sunday, the kind of ordinary day families use to sweep everything they don't talk about under a rug. They were at her place. Weston had brought over takeout and a college update, standard offerings. But the moment Brielle caught him studying the bookshelf where the photo albums were kept, her smile vanished. "You found the letters," she said. Weston didn't blink. "Why didn't you tell me she was alive?" Brielle's jaw tightened. She walked to the sink, rinsed her hands like they were dirty with something she couldn't name. "She left us," she said. "You think I'd let her poison you too?" She didn't shout. That wasn't her way. Brielle had inherited Russell's cruelty, sharp-edged and quiet. She had learned early that pain didn't need to be loud to be effective. It just needed to linger. Flashbacks surfaced like ghosts. Brielle as a child, watching me through the crack in the door, seeing me crumpled in the hallway with mascara streaking my cheeks. She didn't understand the words Russell whispered, but she understood the tone, contempt in a low growl. She saw me cry and turned that into weakness, into betrayal, into something she never wanted to become. She hardened, built armor from ice and obedience. She stopped calling me Mommy and started calling me Delilah. Just once, but it was enough, a warning shot. Weston saw it too, the way her voice shifted when she talked about me, like she was trying to hold back a flood and pretend the dam was by design. "I didn't know the truth," Weston told her. "Not really." Brielle dried her hands on a towel, shoulders drawn like wires. "The truth? The truth is, she ran, and I stayed. She wrote to you." "I burned the first one," she said. "The others I couldn't, but I couldn't read them either." Weston didn't argue, just watched her. He knew pushing wouldn't help. He'd inherited my quiet persistence. But later, when he came back to visit me, he told me something that shifted everything. "She mentioned something," he said, stirring his tea slowly. "Just once, like it slipped. She said, 'You wouldn't remember. You were too young when I came back.'" I looked up. "Came back from where?" "She was institutionalized," he said. "After you left. Just a few months. She never told me. But I looked it up. I found the paperwork." I felt my breath catch. No one had told me. Not back then. I'd asked about her through a mutual friend once. Got a shrug, a muttered, "She's fine," and nothing more. I thought no news was good news. I didn't know she'd broken too. "She was 17, I whispered. Weston nodded. "She said she didn't want to be like you. But I think she was terrified that she already was." After that, the story started to change in Weston's hands. Not cleanly, not quickly, but in fragments, like someone trying to assemble a stained glass window from shards. We spent hours together, more now. He asked about my favorite books. I showed him how to bake my mother's pecan pie. He brought his old camera and took pictures of my garden, of the cracked windows, of me holding a teacup with a half smile. He liked to record things, scraps of conversation, the rustling of leaves, my laugh when I thought no one was listening. "I want to remember this version of you," he said once. "What version is that?" "The one they never told me about." The montage of our moments unfolded gently. Me teaching him how to knit a scarf, his long fingers fumbling through the first row. A late night on the porch, thunder rolling in, him asking if I ever thought of reaching out to Brielle again. "I thought about it every day," I said. But I didn't know if I deserved to." Weston put his recorder down then. "You loved her." "I still do." That was the thing about the pain. It didn't erase the love. It just buried it so deep that sometimes I forgot what it felt like. He reached for my hand, held it for a beat too long. "I think she needs to hear that," he said. "There wasn't one moment when I knew I had to leave Russell. There were thousands, 1,000 cuts to the soul, 1,000 silences that thundered louder than words. But the last one, the one that broke me, was when he used Brielle. It was a Tuesday. I'd made dinner, her favorite, chicken and dumplings. She was 16 and quieter than usual, her eyes darting between me and Russell across the table. He barely looked up from his plate, just stirred his food like it had done something wrong. Then he said, "Brielle, tell your mother what you told me." She stiffened, didn't speak. Russell leaned back, arms folded. "Go on, be honest." And then she did. She said she didn't feel safe with me, that I cried too much, that sometimes I scared her, that she wanted to live with him if I ever tried to leave. I didn't know what was real. I didn't know what had been planted in her head, what had taken root. All I knew was that she had chosen him. It felt like drowning in your own child's voice. That night, I packed a bag. The next morning, while Russell was at work and Brielle was at school, I took a bus 4 towns over. I checked into a motel using the name Linda Garrison. It was the name on a shampoo bottle in the motel bathroom. It felt absurd and necessary. 2 days later, I found the shelter. They didn't ask too many questions. Just gave me a bed, some food, and a clipboard full of forms I barely understood. I told them I was running from a husband. I didn't tell them I'd left my daughter behind. That shame was too thick to speak through. The shelter was small and full of voices. Women who'd run barefoot in the night, women with bruises, and women with nothing left but their names. Some had children, some didn't. Some prayed loudly in bunk beds. Others, like me, just stared at the ceiling and hoped for forgetfulness. I didn't speak much, but I drew. Someone left a box of pencils and a sketch pad on the common room table one night, and I took it back to my bunk. I started sketching faceless women, one each night. Each one was me at a different age. Me at 10 with tangled hair, me at 22 in a wedding dress, me at 38 holding Brielle, wide-eyed and terrified, me at 47, walking away. No faces, just outlines, but they were all me. Guilt haunted everything. The sun through a dirty window, the warmth of a stolen moment of peace, even the taste of a cup of tea someone brought me with a kind smile. How dare I enjoy anything when Brielle was still in that house, when she thought I abandoned her? Sometimes I imagined her face, cold, brittle. Sometimes I imagined her calling out for me and hating me when I didn't come. I stayed at the shelter for 3 months. Eventually, I found work at a local diner, then the library, then I got an apartment. Life moved forward like water over a wound, but it never fully closed, and then Weston showed up. Now he visits every Thursday, same time, same bench in the park behind the library. He always brings a recorder. It's part of some personal project, a narrative thesis, he says, but I think it's more than that. I think he's stitching together the pieces he never got. I think he's saving both of us. The first few weeks, he just let me talk. He never interrupted. He wrote things down but didn't ask me to repeat myself. There was something reverent in the way he listened, like my words were relics. One day, I showed him the sketchbook. He turned each page slowly. They don't have faces. They don't need them, I said. I remember. He didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, would you let me use some of these in the project? Why? Because they tell a story even you won't say out loud. I nodded. That day, something in me loosened, like a string had been cut. Maybe it was the way he looked at the sketches, not with pity, but with understanding. Maybe it was the steadiness of his voice, or maybe I was just tired of carrying all that silence. When he left, he hugged me. I stood there a moment longer, holding on. Healing doesn't announce itself. It just arrives in quiet moments, in the way your name sounds when someone says it with care, in the way your breath steadies for no reason, in the way your hands don't shake when you draw. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like someone becoming real again. It was Weston's idea. I found the listing, he said, sliding his phone across the table. They're selling it. Your old house. I stared at the photo. It looked smaller than I remembered, sun-bleached and sagging at the edges. The porch rails leaned like tired shoulders. The lawn had given up. I don't need to see it, I said quietly. But I do. He didn't say it like a challenge. He said it like a request, like a boy asking to walk through a war zone with the woman who knew where the landmines were. 2 days later, we parked outside. The realtor gave us a half-hour slot and didn't ask questions. I kept my name off the paperwork. Weston signed in as a curious buyer with a family connection. He was good at lying when the truth demanded it. The yard was overgrown. Weeds clawed through cracks in the walkway. The wind moaned through the shutters. I stood on the porch and placed my hand on the doorframe. My fingers rested in a groove where Russell's wedding ring had once gouged the wood. A memory surfaced, him slamming the door after a fight, the ring scraping as he yanked it shut. We stepped inside. Dust motes floated like ghosts in the air. The smell was stale wood, mold, and old grief. The wallpaper peeled at the corners, layers coming apart like identity stripped over time. I walked slowly, my feet mapping trauma. The kitchen hadn't changed. Same crooked cabinet door, same dent in the wall behind the fridge. I touched the edge of the counter, the one Brielle leaned against the day I told her I was leaving. The silence was different here, heavier, watching. "Are you okay?" Weston asked. "No," I said, but that's all right." We moved through the house room by room. Weston carried a small notebook jotting things down. I didn't ask what. I didn't want to narrate the ghosts. In the hallway upstairs, the floor creaked beneath my feet. I opened Brielle's old bedroom door and stood in the threshold. The sunlight through the dirty window lit up the dust like confessions. "She used to tape her drawings to this wall," I murmured. "Unicorns, then faces, then nothing." I didn't go in. I couldn't. We reached the attic. The door groaned when Weston pulled the string. A thin ladder unfolded like a spine, cracking back into place. I hesitated. "You don't have to," Weston said gently. "I do." We climbed in silence. The attic was dim, lit by a cracked skylight. Cobwebs stretched across the beams like ancient lies. Boxes were stacked in corners, half collapsed under their own weight. Then Weston froze. "Here," he said. "This one." It was a wooden box, heavier than the others. Dust-covered, initials carved into the lid. DC. He opened it carefully. Inside, a bundle of photographs, a thick leather-bound diary, and a single envelope with no stamp. He handed it to me. My handwriting. The letter I wrote but never mailed. Addressed simply, Brielle. I sat down on the floor, legs folded beneath me. Weston knelt beside me. We read the letter together. It wasn't long, just a handful of sentences scrawled in desperation. "I'm sorry for everything. I never stopped loving you. I was drowning and I thought letting go would let you float. I was wrong, but I never left you. I still haven't." I couldn't speak when I finished. Weston reached for the diary. "Can I?" I nodded. He flipped through the pages carefully, his face a shifting mask of emotion. Then he stopped. "Delilah." His voice cracked. He turned the book toward me. There, dated 3 days before I left, was an entry I barely remembered writing. "Russell said he needed to go out of town. Told me Brielle would be fine with him for the weekend. I didn't want to leave her alone with him. I knew what he could do when no one was watching, but he insisted. He always insisted." My stomach turned. That was the weekend Brielle stopped speaking to me. The weekend everything changed. I closed my eyes. "What did he do to her?" Weston whispered. "I don't know," I said, "but I think she spent her whole life trying not to remember it." We sat there in the dust and silence, surrounded by the past. The house hadn't just held our family, it had absorbed us. Our pain was in the walls, the floors, the peeling paint. "I used to dream of burning it down," I said. Weston nodded slowly. "But maybe you had to come back first, to bury it properly." I looked at him, this boy with his mother's eyes and his own gentle strength. "Maybe you're right." We didn't take anything with us when we left. Not the diary, not the photos, not the letter. Some truths needed to stay buried with the house. But as we stepped into the daylight, something lifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but release. It was Joanne who nudged me toward it, the same way she nudges most things. Gently, with a kind of casual force you can't quite argue with. "There's a group that meets every Tuesday at the Unitarian Church," she said, pouring 2 cups of strong coffee. "Women like you, women who've had to leave something behind to survive." "I'm not the group type," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "No one is, until they are." That Tuesday, I went, not because I believed it would help, but because the ache of silence had grown too loud again. The room was plain, metal chairs, a circle, and a coffee pot that smelled more burnt than brewed. A woman with gray hair and a leather jacket sat at the center. Her name was Irene. She ran the group with sharp wit and no apologies. "Names don't matter here," she said as I walked in. "Truth does." There were 7 of us that day, all strangers, all too familiar. A woman named Loretta, who hadn't seen her son since he joined a religious commune. She still wrote him letters he never answered. Monica, whose daughter cut her out after years of quiet manipulation by an ex-husband. Gina, who'd signed away custody at 19 and spent the last 2 decades rebuilding her right to grieve. And me. I sat quietly the first week, let their voices fill the air, let the raw edges of their stories scrape against my own. The room wasn't safe exactly, but it was sacred in its honesty. What they call abandonment is often just escape, Irene said one afternoon. The difference is who tells the story. That line stayed with me. Each week I returned and slowly I spoke. Not everything, not yet, but pieces. I told them about Russell, about Brielle, about Weston. I didn't use names, but I didn't have to. They knew those roles too well. I left because staying meant dying by inches, I said once, but they only ever saw the absence. Loretta leaned forward. And did they ever ask why you vanished? No. They rarely do, she said. People like a villain. They don't want a complicated mother. There was laughter after that, not bitter, just tired, shared. I began sketching again, but this time not just faceless women. I gave them mouths, eyes. I gave them postures of strength, backs straight, hands curled into fists or cradling something tender. One night I started a blog. Joanne helped me set it up, sitting beside me in her robe, glasses perched on her nose. Use your real name, she said. I'm not sure I remember who she is. Then write until you do. I called it Still I Remain. The first post was simple. I was a mother, then I was a ghost. Now I'm learning how to be both. The second post got 3 comments, then 20, then more. Women wrote in, some angry, some weeping, some just quiet notes. Thank you. I thought I was the only one. The blog became a kind of tether between the woman I was and the woman I'd become, between the silence and the story. Weston read it too. He never said much, but one night after dinner, he looked at me across the table and said, "You sound like someone who's ready to be seen." I wasn't sure I was, but the writing helped. I told the truth about Russell's control, about the lies Brielle believed, about the guilt that didn't vanish just because I'd done what I had to. One entry I titled, "The Things We Leave to Stay Alive." Another, "Mothers Who Break Before They Bend." The support group read them aloud sometimes. Irene printed one and taped it to the bulletin board. You were not made to disappear. That winter, I stood in front of a crowd, 40 people, maybe more, at a local women's conference. Weston sat in the back, notebook in hand. Joanne, front row, nodding like a proud sister. I read one of my pieces aloud. Halfway through, my voice shook. I thought if I stayed silent, I'd be safe. But silence isn't safety. It's surrender. They stood. They clapped. Some wept. Afterward, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been older than 25. My mother left when I was a kid, she said. I spent years hating her, but now I think I understand. I reached out and touched her hand. That's all any of us ever wanted. The arc had started to bend, not toward resolution, not yet, but toward strength, toward voice, toward presence. I was still Delilah Crowley, and for the first time in decades, I wasn't disappearing. The blog post that reached Brielle wasn't written for her, but somehow it always had been. It was titled, "Mothers Who Were Monsters, Daughters Who Were Wounds." I had written it late one night after a support group meeting, my fingers trembling over the keys. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a defense. It was just the truth about the weight of leaving, the way survival never comes clean, and the jagged pieces that remain in both hands, yours and theirs. I never expected her to find it. But she did. Weston told me. She read it, he said, standing on my porch one morning, arms folded like he was trying to keep himself from unraveling. She's furious. She said you made her look like a villain. She doesn't understand, I whispered. She doesn't want to. Brielle didn't call me. She didn't email. She didn't reach out in any way. But I knew her too well not to know what was happening behind the silence. She wrote a letter. 4 pages. Weston found it crumpled in her trash can. He didn't read it, he said, just saw the torn edge where my name had been scrawled in anger. I pictured her handwriting, tight and slanted, her words like knives. I imagined her starting and stopping, her breath catching between sentences she couldn't finish. If pain could talk, I thought, it would sound like her silence. There were too many truths she hadn't faced, not just about me, about herself. Weston tried again. He brought her coffee, sat at her kitchen table, asked questions he knew she didn't want to answer. She told me she doesn't owe you anything, he said later, said you forfeited your right to her forgiveness. She's right, I said, but that doesn't mean she doesn't need to say it. Out loud. It was a week later when he told me about the therapist. Her therapist quit, Weston said flatly. Cited an ethical breach, something about Brielle withholding key trauma, said he couldn't treat someone who wouldn't confront what actually happened. I stared at the window. She's unraveling, he added, but she won't admit it. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. That same night, Weston called again. His voice was lower than usual, wary. I found something, he said. What? In a storage unit, one of Russell's. It was under his name, but my mom's been paying for it since he died. She didn't know I had access to it. My breath caught. There's a journal, he continued, Russell's. I closed my eyes. Inside, Weston found entries going back years. Notes, records, things Russell had kept meticulously. Some were finances, others, far more disturbing, were observations. About me, about Brielle, about our reactions, our vulnerabilities. One entry Weston read aloud over the phone. Delilah thinks silence is peace. It's power. She just doesn't know how to wield it. Brielle learns faster. She watches everything. She'll learn to choose control over chaos. She just needs the right push. Another. If Delilah leaves, I'll make sure she never gets near the girl again. She'll be a ghost, and Brielle will never even ask where she went. My knees buckled. I sat down slowly, the phone still pressed to my ear. He planned it, I whispered. He shaped everything, Weston said. He didn't just hurt you. He built her into what he wanted, out of spite, out of control. There were entries after I left. Cold, clinical updates. Brielle said she doesn't miss her. Good, she's learning. The worst ones weren't the violent ones. They were the ones that sounded proud, like he'd created something. He didn't just erase me, I said. He remade her. Weston drove to my house the next morning, brought the journal with him. We read it together, front to back, and for the first time, the horror wasn't mine alone. The manipulation, the grooming, the emotional warfare, it was documented. Not just memory, not just trauma, evidence. We sat in silence for a long time. Then I said, she needs to see this. She's not ready. She may never be, but it's time she had a choice. I scanned one of the entries, printed it, put it in an envelope. Weston promised to deliver it. We didn't talk about what would happen next. Some truths are too raw for hope. But now, at least, the silence had a voice, and it wasn't his anymore. The journal sat on my kitchen table like a loaded gun. Even closed, it hummed with venom. I hadn't touched it since Weston left it here. Just knowing it was in the house made the walls feel smaller. Eventually, I opened it. The handwriting was neat, almost tender. That made it worse. Russell had always taken pride in precision. His cruelty was curated, never chaotic. He made his violence feel like reason. Page after page, I read how he'd chipped away at me. His assessments, his strategies, his victories. He didn't write like a man burdened by guilt. He wrote like a craftsman. Delilah weeps too easily, weakness under pressure. Brielle notices. Important to emphasize control as strength. She flinched when I corrected her in front of Brielle. Good, learned response. Told Brielle her mother left because she couldn't handle motherhood. Repetition will embed belief. I put the book down, stood up too fast, knocked over a glass. It shattered on the tile. I didn't clean it up. I walked outside, into the woods behind my house. I didn't stop until the trees closed around me, until the world fell quiet in that way only deep nature knows. And then I screamed. It wasn't a sound I recognized. It came from my chest, from my bones. It tore through me, tore out of me. Decades of silence bursting loose like a dam finally breaking. I screamed until my throat burned, until I was bent over, clutching my knees, sobbing so hard I could barely stand. He had taken everything, not just my marriage, not just my daughter. He'd taken my story and rewritten it in his own language. He'd twisted love into something my child couldn't recognize, and she had spent her whole life believing the version of me he'd created. I don't know how long I was there. At some point, Weston found me. I didn't hear him approach. He didn't say anything, just stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, his face taut with something between pain and respect. He sat down on a nearby log, picked up a stone, rolled it between his palms. We didn't talk. The silence wasn't empty, it was sacred. When I could breathe again, I whispered, "He broke her before I even left." Weston nodded once. "He tried to break you, too." "He almost did." He looked at me, but he didn't. That night, I sat at my desk and stared at the journal. I picked it up again, forced myself to read the last few pages. They were the most terrifying, not because of what they said, but because of what they didn't. There was no regret, no remorse, just a final entry. Control is its own form of legacy. I made copies of the most telling pages, the ones that detailed his manipulation of Brielle, the ones that documented his systematic emotional isolation of me. I wrote a note. "You deserve to know who he really was. I never stopped loving you, but I understand if this doesn't change a thing. I just couldn't keep this from you." I put the journal and the letter in a package. The next morning, Weston drove it to Brielle's. He didn't say much when he came back, just, "She took it. That's all I know. That was enough. The truth didn't heal. It burned. But sometimes the fire is the only way to clear the rot." The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It was addressed in tight, slanted script, her handwriting, unchanged after all these years. No return address, no sender's name, but I knew. My hands trembled just holding it. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the kitchen counter, stared at it like it might explode. Joanne came by not long after. She took one look at me, then the envelope, and said, "You're going to read that with someone sitting next to you." So we waited for Weston. He arrived with 2 cups of coffee and a quiet question in his eyes. I nodded. We sat at the table, the 3 of us, and I opened the envelope with a kitchen knife, slicing slowly across the seal like it was scar tissue. The letter inside was 5 pages, handwritten in dark blue ink. I read it aloud, voice shaking, my eyes moving faster than my mouth could keep up. The opening was rage, sharp and unrelenting. "You made your choices, and I lived with them. You left. You left me with him. You left me with everything you were too afraid to face." Joanne shifted in her seat but said nothing. Weston stayed still. "You say you were protecting me by leaving, but I didn't need protection. I needed you to fight for me, and you didn't." I paused. My throat tightened. Then came the shift, subtle, but there. "I hated you for a long time. I still do sometimes, but the journal, it broke something open. I kept thinking about that weekend. I kept thinking about how I stopped speaking to you, how I started speaking like him." My hand pressed against the table to stay steady. "You didn't protect me, but you tried. I see that now." I stopped reading. The room was too quiet. Joanne reached over and placed her hand on mine. "She said it," she whispered. "She said what needed saying." There was more. "I can't forgive you yet. I don't know if I ever will, but I want to see you. I want to ask my questions to your face." At the bottom of the final page was a time and a place. Sunday, 5 p.m., Fairview Park, the bench by the willow tree. Weston read it again silently, then looked at me. "You don't have to," he said. "I do," I said. We agreed he would come with me. Not for the conversation, just for the courage. Joanne gave me a long, quiet hug that smelled like lavender and cigarettes. Sunday came too fast. The sky was dipped in late gold, the sun slowly bleeding toward the trees. We walked to the bench together, me in a navy coat I hadn't worn in years, Weston beside me like a shadow. He stopped before we reached the clearing. "You go," he said. I nodded, heart galloping. She was already there. Brielle. She stood, straight-backed and braced. She was thinner than I remembered, older. Her hair, once wild and long, was tied back in a loose braid. Her eyes, so like mine, held years. And beside her stood a girl, no older than 9, freckles across her nose, a ribbon in her hair, clutching a notebook like a shield. Brielle caught the flicker of recognition in my eyes and said simply, "This is Isla." I stared. "She's my daughter," Brielle said. "Your great-granddaughter." Isla looked up at me, confused but curious. "She looks like the lady from your drawer," she whispered to Brielle. Brielle didn't correct her. We sat down. No one spoke for a long time. The wind rustled through the willow branches, whispering the things none of us could say yet. Then finally Brielle said, "I brought her because I want her to meet the truth, not the stories I told." Tears filled my eyes. I blinked them away. "I don't expect anything," I said. "I just came." She nodded, looked at Isla. "Go sketch, sweetheart. We're just going to talk." The girl scampered a few feet away and opened her notebook. Her tiny legs crossed beneath her as she began to draw. Brielle turned back to me. "I'm still angry." "I know. But I needed you to be the villain for a long time. It was easier than remembering what he was." "I know." We sat in that shared grief, in that raw honesty that only mothers and daughters can survive. "I'm not ready to forgive you," she said again. "I'm not asking you to. I'm just tired of carrying it alone." I reached over, slow and shaking, and placed my hand over hers. She didn't pull away. That was enough. The bench held more weight than its wood should have allowed. Brielle sat stiffly, her arms folded across her chest. Every inch of her body braced, like she was preparing for a storm. I sat beside her, hands in my lap, the silence stretching between us like barbed wire. Isla played a few yards away, a sketchbook in her lap, humming tunelessly as she drew with fierce concentration. She was the only one not suffocating under the decades floating in the air. "I used to draw like that," I said, not looking at Brielle. "She draws better," Brielle replied, the corner of her mouth twitching. I almost smiled, almost. We sat quietly watching Isla. "I didn't tell her about you," Brielle said suddenly. "Not because I hated you. At least, not just that. I think I wanted to protect her from the confusion." I nodded. "And from the hurt." She nodded back. "Mostly from the hurt." I turned to her. "I want to know her, but only if you're ready. I don't want to wedge myself into something that hasn't had time to grow." Brielle looked down, her fingers tightening around her coat sleeves. "I don't know if I'm ready for her to love you." The honesty was a bruise, but I welcomed it. "Then we'll go slow." The conversation that followed was halting, jagged. We circled around our memories like dogs wary of a shared wound. "She used to ask if I had a mom," Brielle said, "and I'd say yes, but not anymore." I swallowed hard. "Did you believe it?" "For a while," she said, "until Weston showed me the letters. I tried to reach you." "I know," she whispered. "But back then, I needed you to be the one who left, because if I admitted he pushed you out, it meant he did the same to me." We sat there until the sun began to drop, painting Isla's curls gold. A breeze stirred, carrying the smell of cut grass and late autumn leaves. Isla ran over and showed us her drawing. A willow tree, 2 women sitting beneath it, and a little girl with a flower in her hand. "She said you were an artist," Isla said to me. "Are you?" I blinked at the drawing, my heart aching with impossible joy. "I used to be," I said. "Maybe I still am." From that day, things didn't fall into place. They unknotted slowly, cautiously. Brielle and I started exchanging emails, formal at first, like distant colleagues, tentative, short questions, shorter answers, but it was something. Then came a phone call, then another. "Do you remember the ceramic duck I made in 3rd grade?" she asked during one call. "I still have it," I replied. Silence on the other end, then softly, "You kept it?" "Of course I did." A week later, she emailed me a photo of Isla wearing the same sweater Brielle wore in an old picture I kept in the shoebox under my bed. The caption read, "She loves it, says it smells like stories." Each conversation softened something. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the possibility of trust, of rebuilding on the ashes. Meanwhile, Weston worked. His thesis evolved into a full documentary. He titled it Inheritance. It wove together old photos, clips from my blog readings, and quiet, gut-wrenching interviews. One with Brielle, her face in shadow, voice trembling as she admitted, "I thought strength meant not needing anyone. I didn't realize it just meant surviving alone." He included recordings of our park bench meetings, my sketches, his narration stitching it all together. In the final scene, the screen faded to black. Weston's voice came through, measured and calm. I found my grandmother, and in her, the truth none of us were allowed to speak. The credits rolled over Isla's drawing of the three of us under the willow tree. When he showed us the rough cut, Brielle cried for the first time in front of me. Just one tear. She wiped it away fast, but I saw it. She leaned over and whispered, "You deserve your name back." I didn't answer, but later, when Isla asked me, "What should I call you?" I said, "Delilah." She repeated it carefully like it was a spell. "Delilah," she said again, smiling, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a name stained with failure. It felt like something worth saying. The days move slower now. I wake to sunlight spilling through my bedroom curtains and the soft sound of sparrows nesting in the maple tree outside. The silence no longer presses against me. It wraps around me instead, like a gentle shawl. Stillness doesn't feel like hiding anymore. It feels like home. There are scars, of course, some healed, some not, but I've stopped picking at them. I've stopped pretending they're not there. The memoir was published 6 months ago. Still, I remain. It took years to write. Years of remembering, of sorting truth from myth, of deciding what belonged on the page and what could stay buried. I wrote it in pieces between therapy appointments, garden pruning, and long calls with Weston. Sometimes I'd send Brielle a passage I was working on. Sometimes she responded. Sometimes she didn't. That was okay. The book found readers. Not millions, but enough. Enough women who emailed to say, "I thought I was the only one." Enough grown children who whispered, "I think I understand my mother now." That was all I needed. Joanne planned a little launch party in her backyard. String lights, red wine, and too much carrot cake. She gave a toast I can still hear in my head. To the woman who reminded us that surviving isn't shameful, and that being broken doesn't mean being done. Weston graduated last spring, magna cum laude. His name rang out in the auditorium, and I stood clapping with tears in my eyes. Joanne sat beside me, dabbing at her cheeks with a tissue and muttering, "Proud doesn't begin to cover it." His documentary was picked up by a small streaming platform. He's working on another now, this one about memory and myth. He says he wants to help people tell the stories they were told not to speak. I told him, "That sounds like healing." He smiled. "It is." Brielle and I, well, we're still learning. Some days are easier than others. Some weeks we talk more, others not at all. But there's effort now, and that effort carries something holy. She invited me to Isla's school play. I sat in the second row with a corsage pinned to my blouse and tears in my eyes when Isla took a bow. Afterward, Brielle handed me a photo of the three of us, smiling, imperfect. "I'm still angry," she said. "I know," I replied, "but it's not the same kind of angry anymore." We hugged. It wasn't long and it wasn't tight, but it was real. The garden is my favorite place now. It's not neat. The tomatoes lean too far, the lavender spills out of its planter, and the roses bloom where they shouldn't. But there's life in it. Messy, stubborn life. I planted new seeds this morning, sunflowers and wild basil. My hands are dirty, and the knees of my jeans are stained. I like it that way. The earth has a way of reminding you that rebirth starts small. I kneel, pressing my palms to the soil. The sun warms my face. A breeze catches the hem of my shirt. I close my eyes and breathe. I was erased once, not by accident, not by nature, but by someone who thought control was a legacy worth leaving behind. And yet, Here I am. The birds chirp. A dog barks in the distance. Somewhere, a child's laughter echoes. I lean back on my heels, wipe my hands on a towel, and look toward the sky. And then, almost to myself, I whisper, I wasn't dead. I was waiting. If this story stirred something in you, don't silence it. Share it with someone still carrying their mother's shadow or their father's silence. Start the conversation your family never dared to have. Because healing begins where secrets end. And sometimes, the truth you need is the one you weren't supposed to hear.